Does anybody have headings in their Bibles? No? Ezekiel 25 to 32 is prophecies against the surrounding nations. Okay? Chapters 25 to 32 are prophecies against the surrounding nations. Now, if we go to chapter 33, we have a section that begins about the restoration of the kingdom. Okay? And that restoration section goes over to chapter 39 with the final war. And then chapter 40 begins the restored temple. And it's very much like the original description of the temple or the sanctuary in Exodus. So here's how it goes. Ezekiel 1 to 24 is prophecies against Judah before its destruction. Okay? 1 to 24 is all about the destruction of Judah and Jerusalem. In chapter 25, he begins the surrounding nations. In chapter 36, he begins the final war. And in chapter 40, the restoration of the temple. Now then, where is Ezekiel when he's writing in these first 24 chapters? Physically, where is he? In Babylon. He's at Tel Aviv. Not the city in Israel. That's named after this Tel Aviv where Ezekiel lived. The place where the Jewish settlement was. Now, after a year or two, the elders were coming to Ezekiel accepting that he was a prophet. Why? They liked what he said. What he said was God was with them, not with the people where? No. Think about it now. When all the prior prophets had said there would be a remnant that would be saved. Now these folks have been taken to Babylon, and the other people who are left behind, what were their prophets telling them? What were the prophets in Jerusalem telling them? What? Those of us who are left behind, we're the remnant, and those who were taken off, they were the bad folks that God took away in punishment. That's what the Judeans had been saying about the northern kingdom of Israel for about a century. Were they right? Yeah, well, the northern kingdom had been taken away because of its wickedness, right? So you get the logic. If you're taken away in captivity, it's because you're evil. Therefore, the folks in Babylon who are captive are bad. That's what the national prophets in Jerusalem were telling them. Now Ezekiel was saying, no, God is over here with us. He's not over there with them. So the first 24 chapters are all directed by Ezekiel against Jerusalem and Judah back there, saying you're not the remnant, you're not saved. What's going to happen to them over there? They are going to be destroyed. Hardly even a remnant of them is going to be saved. Right? Now remember, the national theology said the temple would stand forever. Do you remember that? That the temple would stand forever? Jeremiah chapter 7. Jeremiah 7. Jeremiah 7. The word that came to Jeremiah from Yahweh. Stand in the gate of Yahweh's house and proclaim there this word and say, hear the word of Yahweh, all you men of Judah who enter these gates to worship Yahweh. Thus says Yahweh of hosts, the God of Israel, amend your ways and your doings, and I will let you dwell in this place. Do not trust these deceptive words. This is the temple of the Lord. The temple of the Lord. The temple of the Lord. For truly, if you amend your ways and your doings, if you truly execute justice with one another, if you do not oppress the alien, the fatherless, or the widow, or shed innocent blood in this place, and if you do not go after other gods to your own hurt, then I will let you dwell in this place, in the land that I gave of old to your fathers forever. This is wonderful about the nature of prophecy. Is prophecy conditional or unconditional? What does the dispensationalist say? Listen to Pat Robertson on the 700 Club. Listen to the Baptist minister. Listen to the Disciples of Christ minister. Right? What will they tell you about prophecy? Prophecy is by nature what? Unconditional. If it hasn't been fulfilled yet, then what? It'll be fulfilled in the future during the last 7 years, during the tribulation, the end time. That's what they assume. What does this passage say? Jeremiah is saying, if you do certain things, what? I'll let you stay here where I promised you would be forever. What's that say about prophecy? It's got conditions. Now, the conditions weren't that terrible. What were they? Social policy first. Don't oppress the widows, the fatherless. Don't carry out judicial murders. Don't murder the innocent. And what was the last condition here? Jeremiah chapter 7, we're in. The so-called temple sermon. The temple sermon in Jeremiah 7. What does that have to do? Well, this passage where today is Ezekiel's temple prophecy. What was the last of these conditions? Verse 6. Yes. And if you do not go after other gods to your own hurt, then I will let you dwell here. Paganism was forbidden. The actual carrying out of pagan rituals was forbidden. Now, how did the ancient cultures conceive of the universe being run? How was it run? We say the pagans worshipped how many gods? Lots. There were local gods, there were little gods, and there were big gods. Where were the big gods? Let's get the picture again. Where were the big gods? Where were they? On the cosmic mountain. Exactly. In session, in council. The high god sat in the center, right? El, remember? The Father God. He sat in the center on his cherubim throne, and he was surrounded by his heavenly court of other gods who had responsibility for various parts of the cosmos. Okay? Now then, they had turned the temple into that situation. Where was Yahweh? He was still in the inner shrine of the temple, and the other courts had become what? They had become chapels. These side rooms around the courts had become chapels to all these other gods. So that when you went to the temple, were you still worshiping Yahweh? Oh yes, Yahweh is what? He's the high God, and what else? And we're worshiping all these others in the heavenly court too. Okay? Now, there was a reason for that. And the reason was that theologically they had said, Yahweh being the high God is too busy right now to be concerned with the world. It says in this passage that we're going to read in Ezekiel that they had said, Yahweh isn't here anymore. He's not interested in the world anymore. He doesn't see because what? He's withdrawn. And since he's withdrawn, what did that leave them with? That left them to worship the other gods. Do you follow the logic? If Yahweh's withdrawn, then let's worship the other members of the heavenly court. All right? Some of these gods were drawn from Mesopotamia, like Tammuz, the dying and rising grain god. See, these gods died and rose again every year. How do you know? Well, you look at nature. During the dry season, I told you about the Canaanite version of this when I told you about the Baal epic. But now in the Mesopotamian form, Dumuzi, this ancient king who had become divine, Tammuz, died when the dry season came. And then, of course, when the rains came, what happened? He was resurrected. So the death and resurrection of the god was an annual cycle. All right? Now, at the end of the dry season, of course, at the beginning of the dry season, the women wept for Tammuz in mourning, hoping to get his fertility back. And at the beginning of the rainy season, they rejoiced at his rising. Okay? So what we have here is polytheism, and it's polytheism of a particular type. They still worshipped a highest god, and they were saying the highest god was still Yahweh the Lord. What do we call that, the worship of the highest god? That's called henotheism. When Daniel wished to communicate, Daniel was a contemporary of these people, when Daniel wished to communicate with the Babylonians about God's purposes, what did he say? When he said to Nebuchadnezzar, look, this dream, I know where you got this dream. Where did he say this dream came from? The Most High God, right? And now, was there any argument then between them? Apparently not. Apparently there was not. Okay. So, now, the Lord withdraws from the temple in these chapters that we're studying, in chapters 8 to 11. Okay. 1 to 24 is prophecies against Judah and Jerusalem. Okay? You can put this down if you've got a pencil. 25 to 32 is prophecies against the nations. It'll be very interesting to see what he has to say about the surrounding nations. 33 to 39 is the restoration, final battle. And 40 to 48 is the restored temple. Say, Tom, if you were a dispensationalist, what would you think was going to happen to the temple in Jerusalem if you were Pat Robertson? In Ezekiel 40 to 48, it says at the end of the world it's going to be standing, so what would you presume? That the Jews over there are going to rebuild it. Yeah. Yeah. Now, let's also talk about this vision of the Lord, because the Lord is here and he is lifting Ezekiel up and taking him over to Jerusalem. And it's the same image of God that we had in Ezekiel 1 to 3. But we had to talk about so much background to 1 to 3 that we never got to the vision itself. Okay, first of all, let's put this up again. Now, I know that a lot of people here recognize this instantly. Everybody should. What is this? What is that? You know what I said last night, that they probably didn't have the lines exact anyway? But then I got to thinking, they just come from Egypt where they laid out things like this. They probably had it very exact because the Egyptians laid out things exactly. What is this? What is this thing? The camp of Israel, the war camp of Israel. Where is this described? Numbers 2 and 3. Okay, now what were the tribes and the compass points? I think I have it down now. The war camp of Israel. When Israel went into the wilderness, they were set up as a warrior nation. They were set up by military units. Each had a standard that had a symbol that related to his own tribe. The 4 tribes on the 4 compass points were the four most important tribes. Those of you who haven't seen this before, have you ever seen pictures of the sanctuary where the tents of the people were right around the sanctuary? No, it wasn't that way at all. The sanctuary was holy, and it was set in an open square. Now, how big was this open square? Well, about a mile across. All right? The sanctuary was in an open square about a mile across. If you were taking a sin offering to the sanctuary, you would walk at least a half a mile from the time you moved out of where the people lived before you got to the sanctuary in any direction. Okay? Now, in between the tribes and the sanctuary lived one of the tribes. You see, because the tribe of Joseph had been divided into Ephraim and Manasseh, so there were really 13 tribes. What tribe lived between the people and God? What tribe lived here? The Levites, yes. Standing as priests between God and Israel. Now, what was the dominant direction in the ancient world? When we look at a map, what is our primary direction? North. Not so in the ancient world. All you need to do is think about it. What was the dominant direction? East, of course. And so the dominant tribe, the most important tribe, was directly to the east on the compass point. What tribe was that? What was the ruling tribe? The Testament of Jacob, Genesis 49. What was the ruling tribe? Judah. Judah, whose symbol was what? Lion. To the west, we have the ruling tribe of the northern kingdom, the other main rival tribe to Judah, Ephraim, right? And Ephraim's symbol was what? Ephraim was the ox, the strong tribe, the great, large tribe. To the south was Reuben, Reuben unstable as water, Reuben who had no power to act, who lost his primogeniture because he was the firstborn, who wasn't able to lead his brothers directly, Reuben who thought a lot but never acted right, Reuben who lost his brothers' respect. Reuben was the head of a man. Okay? And of course, Dan, the smallest of the tribes, Dan that moved from south to north, Dan who eventually sided against Israel, Dan the viper, the original was an eagle. Okay. Then, of course, there were symbols for each of the other tribes, which can be derived directly from the Testament of Jacob. When you go to Jerusalem, to the high temple, the great temple in Jerusalem, the center temple of modern Judaism, you can see there the stained glass windows made by Marc Chagall. And in those stained glass windows is 12 of these great windows, one of the great pieces of artwork in Israel. And each one of those has a modern symbol or representation of the 12 tribes, and they're set in the proper compass points. So that when you stand in the center of the great temple in Jerusalem and you look to the east, you see the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Okay? Yes. Now, when we see this picture of God in Ezekiel 1, all this strange stuff in Ezekiel 1 isn't strange at all. And it reappears in Ezekiel 8, so that's the passage we're studying. But let's start with chapter 1. And we're not going to spend a long time on this, but let's just look at it, verse 4. This original vision, which had occurred a year and a half prior to the vision in chapter 8. We're studying the vision in chapter 8 today, but this is the original vision a year and a half earlier. All right? Now, what does it say? Verse 4. As I looked, behold, a stormy wind came out of the north, and a great cloud with brightness round about it, and fire flashing forth continually, and in the midst of the fire, as it were, gleaming bronze. Okay, he pictures this storm cloud with the lightning shining out of it and the light space in the center. And in the midst of it came the likeness of 4 living creatures. And this was their appearance. They had the form of men. Each had 4 faces, and each of them 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the soles of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like burnished bronze. Under the wings on the 4 sides they had human hands. This you do recognize is a description of the cherubim on the ark. So the first symbolism we have is the symbolism of the old Ark of the Covenant, which by Ezekiel's time didn't exist anymore, had been lost, was no longer in existence. Okay? So where does this symbolism come from originally? Well, the cherubim throne is very ancient. El, the father of the gods, was pictured as sitting on the cherubim throne already in the Ugaritic myths in the 24th century BC. So here we have the picture of the cherubim, and they had 4 faces and wings thus, verse 9. Their wings touched one another, just as it is on the ark, and they went everyone straight forward without turning as they went. As for the likeness, as without turning as they went, so that the lion symbol was always on what side? Always on the east. The man was always to the south. Okay, the eagle was always at the north, and the ox was always on the west. Maintained the perfect symbolism. All right. Such were their faces, and their wings were spread out above. Each creature had 2 wings, each of which touched the wings of another, while 2 covered their bodies, and each one straight forward. Wherever the Spirit would go, they went, without turning as they went. In the midst of the living creatures, there was something that looked like burning coals of fire. Now I know what that image is, of course, as burning coals of fire, as it is where? On the ark, or, you see the temple, the sanctuary had three altars, thank you. What was the first? No, the first. The brazen altar burnt offering in the outer court, yes. Then what? In a line now, in a line, the altar of incense, and then annually, on the Day of Atonement, what else was an altar? The ark itself was an altar, on which an offering was made, on which blood was put. So now, we have the imageries of the 3 altars. The altar burnt offering, the altar of incense, and the ark. Okay, so this is sanctuary imagery here. Now, what is striking is that sanctuary imagery, all evidence no sanctuary imagery, and yet you get to Ezekiel 1 and it's like a puzzle for a lot of people. Like, what is this strange stuff? It shouldn't be strange, it should be familiar. Now, in the midst of the living creatures, there was something that looked like burning coals of fire, like torches moving to and fro among the living creatures, and the fire was bright, and out of the fire went forth lightning. Well, I understand this theophany, as it's called, this appearance of God, because the appearance of God in the Bible is always in the midst of what? God appears in what? In storm. What kind of a storm? We have lightning, thunder, hail, earthquake, fire. Yes, all of these images in the Bible of the appearance of God, which is here, right? Now, as I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the earth beside the living creatures. Now, as he goes on, what other image is added beside the image of the ark, the altar burnt offering, the altar of incense, the cherubim? What else is added? The war chariot. Now, who invented the war chariot? No, the Romans. The Romans didn't invent anything. They were good at borrowing from other people. I don't know. They did invent clear glass. I'll take that back. The Romans invented clear glass. Up to that, glass you couldn't see through. So I suppose clear glass is a nice invention. But now you have to wash it because you can see through it.
The question is, who invented the...
Who invented the war chariot? You see, the Romans would be too late because we're here in Ezekiel and we already have a war chariot. The Egyptians, that's the answer, yes. The Egyptian empire was created on the back of a war chariot because the Egyptians developed the use of the chariot and infantry. They would send their men on foot straight forward, and then they had the chariots on two sides to do what? While the enemy was fighting the people straight forward, what would happen? The chariotry would weave in first one side and then the other in a circle, and what? And cut down the... That's how the Egyptian empire was created. That was what was about to happen to Israel at the end of the Wadi Tumalat, facing the Reed Sea, and they knew it too. Because they saw what they see in the distance. They saw the dust rising from the oncoming chariots, and they knew that it was over. All right? Okay, so now the war chariot, a wheel beside each living creature, one for each of the four living creatures. I know why there's four wheels, because the chariot goes in how many directions? All four. Yes, it goes this way, and then it goes over here and down. Right? It always maintains this relationship of keeping the compass point tribes on the proper compass point. Yes?
I have this thought. The chariot wasn't copied from the chariot that comes from God.
Well, culturally, it was invented by the Egyptians. But all these cultural images that were in use in ancient times, the Bible makes use of. If God is a warrior, then what? Then we'll see him leading his people in a chariot. What does it say in Habakkuk? That he rode on the cherubim and he flew to the aid of his people. Yes. All right. And then the open space, the firmament, because you remember the big thing about the ark was the open space where the light of God appeared. And he's very, very, very careful about describing God. He says that there was something that appeared like a body. Why is he so careful about that? To say that it appeared like a body. Because he doesn't want to say what? He doesn't want to say it is a body. He doesn't want you to think that God, because he appears in form, is a creature. Right? He's being very careful about that. Now, that's the background to this appearance of God. Now, chapter 8. I knew we could get to the lesson if we rushed. Ezekiel 8. Does anybody have any question about what we've said so far? Ezekiel 8. In the 6th year, in the 6th month, on the 5th day of the month, as I sat in my house, with the elders of Judah sitting before me. As I said, they liked what Ezekiel said because it was against the people in Jerusalem and in favor of the people in Babylon. Where was God? God was with them there in Babylon. He had come in his chariot to be with them. Right?
Bringing judgment for those does it have
yes. If you see a great king heading toward you in his chariot, what's the implication? You better hope he likes you, because if he doesn't, what? The remainder of your life is about to be very short. Yes. So of course, whenever the chariot appears, it's an image of judgment. It's important for you to know that the word judgment is frequently translated atonement in English, because what God does, when it says he does great acts of judgment, it's sometimes translated atonement. Which does God do? Does God bring judgment, or does he bring salvation? Oh, well, that depends on you. Well, justice and mercy are the two qualities in the great controversy. That's the question. Can God be just and merciful at the same time? God does one thing. God does one thing, and that thing either brings salvation or destruction. Right? God carried out one set of events in the Exodus on Egypt, right? He carried out one set of events. And what did those events do? It saved some people and what? Destroyed others, depending on how they related to those events. Right? How about this quotation from Ellen White? We haven't quoted Mrs. White yet this morning. Gospel truth hardens when it does not save. Right? So what can the gospel do to you? It can save you or can destroy you. Right? Yes, so the chariot then must be, by implication, an image of impending judgment, or what? If you were Ezekiel and you thought God wasn't with you and you saw him coming, what would you say? Salvation. Look, in Revelation 16 there's the plagues, and the plagues culminate in the coming of Christ in Revelation 18. That's the final end of the last plague. How come the coming of Christ is a plague? Well, if you're not saved and Christ comes, that's the worst plague. Right? Yeah? Alright. The hand of the Lord God, Yahweh Elohim, fell on me there. Okay? Verse 2. Then I beheld, and lo, a form that had the appearance of a man. The same phrase from chapters 1 and 2 in describing the appearance of God. Below what appeared to be his loins, it was fire. And above his loins, it was like the appearance of brightness, like gleaming bronze. He put forth the form of a hand, and took me by a lock of my head, and the Spirit lifted me up between earth and heaven, and brought me in visions of God to Jerusalem, to the entrance to the gate of the inner court that faces north, where was the seat of the image, the idol to jealousy, which provokes the Lord to jealousy. And behold, the glory of the God of Israel was there, like the vision that I saw in the plain. Now he's referring back to the vision in chapter 1. Okay. Now this is interesting. Gods were localized in the ancient world. You would expect God to be where? God is in his temple. No. Where is God here in Ezekiel? Well, God is coming to his temple. Where has he been? He's been in Babylon, ostensibly a pagan land where he has no authority. But where has he been? He has been in Babylon. This is an important point, and it changed Judaism from a national religion with boundaries to a world religion. God is where? Oh, yes, he has a temple, but that temple doesn't limit him. Where is he? Wherever he chooses to be or needs to be at the moment. Right? Now, he said to me, Son of man, lift up your eyes now in the direction of the north. So I lifted up my eyes toward the north, and behold, north of the altar gate, in the entrance, was this idol of jealousy. It's a sexual thing. It's a fertility thing. He said to me, Son of man, do you see what they are doing, the great abominations that the house of Israel are committing here, to drive me far from my sanctuary? But you will see greater abominations. Now, abomination is a word used in Leviticus to mean some practice carried out as part of the cult of a pagan religion. That when it says in Leviticus it's an abomination, it means it is a thing that is characteristically carried out in a pagan religion which is forbidden to Israel. Okay? So it's a technical term. We have to remember Ezekiel is what? What's Ezekiel's background? He is a priest. It's not surprising that much of the terminology comes from Leviticus. He is a priest. And now for the first time, look, he's in exile. He's been in exile for a year and a half in a flat land, and he comes from the hill country. And he's ill. His wife is ill. A lot of the people who have come over there have died because they have been on this forced march and they've been living a terrible life in Babylon. They're prisoners. What would anybody in that condition think about? What would be natural to think about? What would you want to do? You want to go where? Go home. You have to have moved from home to sympathize with him. You have to have moved a far distance to a very different culture to catch this. He wants to go home. And of course he had thought about home, and now for the first time he was home. And he was on his own stomping grounds. Ezekiel was from a priestly family from where? From where? There were priestly families all through Palestine. But where was his family? In Jerusalem itself. He was from the Jerusalem priesthood. So he was home in a very, very specific way. This is where he'd grown up, around these courts. In fact, in the vision, he even, what? He even sees some people he knows. Individuals he knows. It's not a symbolic vision. Okay? Did you catch what I said? He's seeing things exactly as they are. Now, he brought me to the door of the court, and when I looked, there was a hole in the wall. Sounds like one of the courthouses in Massachusetts. There was a hole in the wall. He said to me, "Son of man, dig in the wall," because this is a plaster. Plaster has come up over the brick or the stone. And I dug into the wall, and there was a door. He said to me, "Go in and see the vile abominations they're committing here." So I went in and saw, and this is in one of these chapels there, and portrayed on the wall round about were all kinds of creeping things. Now, creeping things is the Levitical terminology from Genesis 1 for insects. Now, I know which religious culture this is. I know what religion these people are following. Creeping things and loathsome beasts and all the idols of the house of Israel. Which culture was it that tended to worship animals and insects and half man, half animal, half insect? But this is Egypt, yes. Remember there was a pro-Egyptian party? They had, they never could decide how they were going to get free. Either we'll cast our lot with the Egyptians, and the Egyptians will save us from the Babylonians, or we'll cast our lot with the Babylonians and be subservient, and then, because we're good, they'll let us stay free. Right? Now this is certainly the pro-Egyptian party's head religious spot. It really is hopeless to worship an insect like a dung beetle, right? Because a dung beetle doesn't care at all whether you're worshiping it and isn't going to give you any moral guidance at all, right? And how the Egyptians got to the state of worshiping animals and insects is a long and interesting story. But, nevertheless, it was an old and highly developed religion by the time of Ezekiel. So the pro-Egyptian, this would have been their head chapel now. The whole pro-Egyptian party throughout Judah would have been the center of their worship here. All right? Now, verse 11, before them stood 70 men of the elders of the house of Israel. This is the whole Sanhedrin, the whole 70 elders that Moses had set up. This is the whole ruling class of the kingdom. So what Ezekiel is saying is, how many were refusing to participate in the pagan rituals? How many said, no, this is an abomination, it's forbidden on pain of death in Leviticus, I'm not going to be involved? How many? None. Yes, it says 70. None refused. 70 out of 70 took part in the pagan cult. This is not a good situation. And with Jaazaniah the son of Shaphan standing among them. Now look, this family of Shaphan was the good family. You remember how when Jesus was tried, there was Joseph of Arimathea and there was Nicodemus on the Sanhedrin. Two people stood up for him and kept protecting him. And then when he was killed, they went to get his body. In Jeremiah's day, there was one family out of the ruling family. One family that protected Jeremiah from being executed again and again. One family out of the whole 70 ruling families. And now what does Ezekiel see? The ruling head of this clan, the ruling man of this family, what is he doing? He's right there with them. It's broken down totally. There isn't anybody left who's willing to stand by the truth. Not one person. Now, the implication is pretty strong. How had things gone in the year and a half since Ezekiel and his family had been exiled? Now, this whole passage is presented as a shock to Ezekiel. It's presented as if he didn't know anything about this. What had happened? It had declined totally in that last year and a half. Yes. Each had his censer in his hand, and the smoke of the cloud of incense went up. Then he said to me, Son of man, have you seen what the elders of the house of Israel are doing in the dark, every man in his room full of pictures? For they say, Yahweh does not see us, for Yahweh has forsaken the land. There was the key. The belief that God was no longer involved in human history, that he wasn't there anymore, that he wasn't interested, and that he wasn't going to take any action, pro or con. Right? No, this is in the temple. These are in the side rooms, the court surrounding the temple. Then he brought me to the entrance of the north gate of the house of Yahweh, and behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. He said, now this is not the Egyptian party. What is this? Now where have we switched? Now we're over in the Babylonian religion, the weeping for Tammuz. He said to me, have you seen this, O son of man? You will see still greater abominations than these. Now look, these Judean exiles were surrounded by the pagan religion. We read in Daniel how he was faced immediately with the decision whether he was going to be part of the pagan religion or not. They were surrounded with the pagan religion. And for the first time surrounded by it, they had to make a choice about whether they wanted to be part of it. And the exiles were drawing in, away from the pagan religion. But when you go back to Judah, what? The people are practicing it. Verse 16, he brought me into the inner court of the house of Yahweh. Behold, at the door of the temple of Yahweh, between the porch and the altar, where atonement was made, were about 25 men with their backs to the temple of Yahweh and their faces toward the east, worshiping the sun toward the east. What time of day was it? I know what time of day it was. It's dawn. What's happening? The sun's rising, and that's why all these religious festivals are going on. It's the time of the morning sacrifice, and the temple is in full use, right? It's the busiest time of day. The temple is in full use because it's dawn, and everybody's worshiping, and he's seeing how the worship is being carried out. Have you seen this, verse 17, O son of man? Is it too slight a thing for the house of Judah to commit the abominations which they commit here, that they also fill the land with violence and provoke me further to anger? Lo, they put the branch to their nose. Therefore I deal in wrath, my eye will not spare, nor will I have pity. And though they cry in my ears with a loud voice, I will not hear. This is a pronouncement here. This is a pronouncement. What we're following is the standard judgment theme. First, what? Some years ago, an Adventist Bible teacher on an Adventist college campus said that the idea of an investigative judgment is an outmoded bad idea. That there isn't, investigative judgment isn't something that you find in the Bible. And a lot in the crowd said, yes, that's nice, that's wonderful. Well, I don't know what Bible they were reading. What have we been doing so far? Every time he takes Ezekiel around to the various courts of the temple and says, have you seen this? What is that? Are you marking this? What is that? That's the investigation. When Adam and Eve sinned, what did the Lord do? He came not because he needed to know, because God doesn't need to know. That's not the idea of the investigative judgment. And he said to Adam and Eve, "What have you done?" And he asked them to detail it, right? Now, when the Tower of Babel was built, what did the Lord say? "I'll go down and I will do what? I'll investigate. And I'll know altogether," he said, "what to do." Now, when the guardian deities of the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah came and complained to the Lord that they were out of control, he went with the two and he stopped to see Abraham, and what did he say? He said, "The outcry against these cities is very great. And so what? I'm going to go down and see and investigate, and what? And if I decide that what I've been told is fully correct, then what? Then I'm going to destroy them." And then Abraham thought of Lot, and the intercession began. Right? These are themes of investigation. What Ezekiel is being asked to do here is to be the witness and see that what God is saying is correct. And then, having presented the evidence, what does he say? As a result, I'm going to destroy them, and I have decided that when I carry out my destruction, if they cry to me, what? I won't be there. I won't be there to hear. What does that tell you? We have a phrase for this. For Judah, for the people living in Judah, what? This is the announcement in Ezekiel that what was happening for Judah. Here in 594, when the rebellion against Babylon developed, probation for Judah had run out. It was closed. When God says, "You can cry to me, but I won't hear," what does that mean? That's how this passage in Ezekiel became a symbol for the end of the world. Putting the seal on those who were sorry for sins and destroying everybody else became a symbol that was used in Revelation for the end of the world. That's how it got to be a symbol. Because this is a moment when probation closed for some people. All right? And here's where the seal of God image developed. Verse 9:1. He cried in my ears with a loud voice, saying, "Draw near, you executioners of the city, each with his destroying weapon in his hand." 6 men came in the direction of the upper gate, which faces north, every man with his weapon of slaughter in his hand. And with them was a man clothed in linen, with a writing case at his side. This is the heavenly scribe. Right? They have all these court officials. This is the heavenly scribe from the heavenly court. And they went in and stood beside the bronze altar. Now, of course, the bronze altar is where sacrifice is made. Now the glory of the God of Israel had gone up from the cherubim on which it rested to the threshold of the house. And eventually it goes to the gate, and then it goes to, look. He went from the inside to the front door, then he went to the east gate, and then he went up to the Mount of Olives, because the temple in Jerusalem was just a reflection of this war camp in the wilderness. God left. Who were spared? What was the key? Who got the mark? What was the key to get the mark? That's the point of the whole lesson. What was the key to get the seal of God? There was one simple definition. Who got the seal of God? Those who were sighing and groaning for the sins of Israel. Those who were not partaking but were sorry for sin. Who were characteristically repentant. Who weren't blaming God when his judgments fell, but who were sorry for the sin, not the result. That's what distinguishes those who will be saved and those who will be lost in the church at the end of time. Thank you.